I have titled this talk, Talking Shit, or a few things that I've learned about giving presentations. So this is kind of a distillation of all of the things that I've learned about giving presentations over years and years and years of giving presentations in different contexts. So I was a university lecturer for a while, I've done a lot of startup pitching and that sort of work, and I've done a lot of workshops and those sorts of things as well. So that's basically where all of this has come from. I want to talk about not just how you present in front of an audience and how you actually stand up and do the talk, but I want to talk about how you develop a presentation with slides and that sort of thing. So it's not so much about just doing a startup pitch or just doing something that's kind of business related. It's also if you ever need to do any teaching or if you ever need to teach someone something using a slide deck in a presentation. This is how you would go about it. So I'm actually going to start long before you walk onto the stage and start talking. I'm going to start way back when you were planning your talk. So that's where we'll begin. So one last thing before I kind of dive into it. This is the stuff that works for me. And to be entirely honest with you, I probably skip a lot of these steps now. But when you're starting to learn how to do this, if you follow this process and you actually work through it in the way that I kind of describe here, you'll find that you get better at it a lot more quickly. So it might seem like some steps you could skip, but if you actually take the time to do them, then you'll find that you're actually developing better presentations. People are remembering what you're saying. They're walking away with something, which is ultimately the goal. So with that in mind, when you are planning a talk, something that I would advise everyone to do is don't sit down at a computer and PowerPoint right away. Start with pen and paper and start with mapping out what you would like to say in your talk and the different topics that you would like to cover. Now, people do this in different ways. Some people use post-it notes and they write like a different idea on each post-it note and arrange them on the desk. Other people use index cards. Other people sketch it out on kind of a big piece of paper. But the idea is you want to get down everything that you're going to talk about without worrying too much about what order you're going to say things in and all of that sort of stuff at the start. You really just want to know what is the content of the talk, what are the things that I need to cover. And you're going to be a lot more free to experiment and to work kind of in a seamless way if you're starting with pen and paper first. Then what you want to do is you want to figure out what the story that runs through the heart of your presentation is. So all good presentations will have something that looks like a beginning, a middle, and an end. They'll take the people listening on some sort of journey. You'll notice today that my structure really follows the process of giving a talk. So we start with the planning and then we go through the different steps from there. So you can kind of follow that as a thread. It logically makes sense as a way of delivering a story. Most presentations can be done this way. Even a startup pitch. Really what you're wanting to do is say, hey, there was this problem out in the world and we came up with this fantastic business idea that solves this problem. And if we were able to solve the problem, then the world would be better. Here is the happy ending at the end. Even the most boring and dry kind of academic content can be told with a story. And the thing is, people will remember a story much more than they will remember a jumbled kind of collection of facts. So you want to get your story figured out. And when you've got all of your index cards or your post-it notes, you can start to rearrange them and say, okay, this kind of belongs in the beginning. People need to know this before they'll understand this other stuff. And then we can start to weave in the extra stuff in the middle and then we can start to close it up at the end. Now this is kind of the idea of structuring your talk as well. So particularly for a talk like the one that I'm giving this evening, which is about half an hour's worth of stuff, you don't want to just have one kind of long, loose structure for half an hour because people will really struggle to kind of compartmentalise that and to understand it all at once. You want to break it up into sections so that people can kind of understand a theme and an idea for a particular section. It also gives you an opportunity to kind of do little sum-ups in between the bits of your talk. So you can kind of get through the planning phase and then you can say, here are the things that we learned in the planning phase. Then you can do the next bit, then you can do the next bit. The longer your talk is, the more important it is that you do this. That you break things into chunks, make them kind of easily digestible. The way that I like to work is I tend to try and make sure that no chunk in my presentation, no kind of themed cluster of slides and ideas, is any longer than 10 minutes on its own. Because that way you get an opportunity to reset people's attention spans and you can kind of bring them back to your core point and then you can move on to the next bit. All sound pretty good so far? Yep. Awesome. One other thing that is really important is no matter how long your presentation is, and I can say this as someone who was a university lecturer for a while, and so 2 hours was a pretty standard presentation length, you should have one key thing that you're trying to get across, or one key message, which you come back to again and again and again. So I was participating in a design thinking workshop today, and the speaker at that design thinking workshop did this really well. He told us a whole bunch of stuff. He told us about probably 50 distinct different things that we would remember at the end of a full day workshop. But there was one key point that he went back to over and over again. He said design thinking is about using empathy and avoiding bias. And everything we're doing today is geared towards that. Coming back to this idea of use empathy, avoid bias. So nobody would have walked out of that room without remembering that one thing. A trap that you can fall into is you think, well, actually I've got 5 key messages and I want people to remember all 5 of my key messages. Unfortunately, human beings aren't terribly good at that. They wind up with word soup and they'll only remember one thing anyway. The trick is making sure that the one thing that they remember is the one thing that you want them to remember, not some random anecdote that you kind of threw out in the middle that you think is quite funny and that will stick in their memory. So you've got to make sure if you've got a key message, if you've got something that you really want people to take away with them, that you repeat that multiple times in your presentation. Now, all of these things can be done in the planning phase. All of these things can be done while you've got index cards and post-it notes and you haven't touched a computer yet. But now you've figured out your structure and you've figured out your story and you've got the basic bones of your presentation and you know the topics and the territory that you want to cover. The next step is you want to build your slide deck. So you want to put together some slides. And so what I'm going to talk about next is some guiding principles and some rules that I like to use when I'm working on slide decks. So the first one, and hopefully you've noticed this already with this slide deck, is I, with almost no exceptions, try and make sure that I'm only ever saying one thing with each slide. Now this is something that university lecturers don't tend to do spectacularly well. You'll get a slide and it's got 30 dot points on it and they fade the dot points in one at a time, and by the end of the slide you're looking at 15 things at a time and you're trying to understand all of it at once. 1 point per slide, people will focus on what you're talking about and they will remember the core message of that slide. So that's something that I think is really important. I try with as much effort as I can to not break this rule unless I feel like I really have to. Quick show of hands, how many people think that most people do presentations this way? No hands? Would it be nice if they did? 1 point per slide? Yeah. I mean, honestly, if I spoke about take-home messages earlier. One thing that you take away from today, this is actually the thing that beats everything else in this slide deck. If you did just this one thing, you will be better than 90% of people who do presentations because nobody does this and it makes a huge difference. It also helps with your thinking about your slide deck. It makes it easier for you to structure things and figure things out. So that's a really key one. But there are other things as well. You may or may not recognise this guy. This is a person called Guy Kawasaki, and he was one of the early evangelists for Apple. So he was a really kind of active person when Apple was just getting started, kind of going out and spreading the gospel of Apple and telling people how amazing Apple was. These days he is an evangelist for a company called Canva, so he kind of encourages people to use Canva. But he's done a lot of work with venture capital, he's done a lot of work with startups and all of this sort of stuff. And he came up with a rule for startup pitches. And this was his rule. He calls it the 10-20-30 rule. And basically what he says is, any presentation, 10 slides max. It should only take 20 minutes. If it takes longer than 20 minutes, you're in trouble. And you should use a 30+ font size. Now, he actually has a more subtle rule than that. I think it's divide the age of the oldest person in the room by half. That's your font size. So when you're talking venture capitalists, 30 is just about bang on. You'd probably be a bit safer with 40. So this is his rule. Now, this is for startup pitches. Obviously, a lot of deep content kind of presentations, you might not be able to get away with this. but this is a really good guide for if you had free reign on how to design a presentation and you wanted to teach people something, if you stuck to these rules and tried to stick to them, you would find that you managed to keep people's attention, that you were able to get your message across, and that you didn't get kind of lost in waffle. So remembering this 10-20-30 rule is really important. And you can probably imagine it's kind of hard to break your 1 point per slide rule if you're using size 40 or size 50 font. You pretty quickly start to realise I can only get so much onto the slide. Now, if you're following along with how I do things, I am not having very many words on my slides, but I'm trying to have a really strong image for each of my slides. Now, if you're trying to do that as well, it's really important that you actually use quality images. So you try and use images that are high resolution. So it doesn't matter when you blow them up onto a wall, they still look good. That you try and use images that are striking and actually provide a decent background to the point that you're trying to make. That you also try and create an image that's kind of memorable. So hopefully people will start to associate, oh, that concept, that thing that I was being taught, I can remember that because I can remember that image it was taught with. And you'll see with a number of the slides in this deck, I've tried to do that. Whether I've done it successfully or not, that's up to you. One other thing that's really crucial is try and avoid using cliched stock images. And this is something that I see when I kind of teach people how to do presentations. I say, use quality images, do all of this sort of stuff. And then the very first slide deck they do, it's all business people pointing at whiteboards and, people leaning over the shoulder of the laptop and all of that sort of stuff. People tune that right out. Like, we have seen enough of that. We don't see it for what it is. We just don't see it and we don't remember it. And so you've got to try and avoid that trap of just using the generic stock images. If you were to go back to some of my early presentations, even my TEDx talk that I gave, I broke this rule. This is something I've learned since. It's worth taking the time to find an image that will actually resonate with people, not the image that everyone else would have used. Now, you've probably noticed that I've done this evening. If you want people to pay attention to you while you're talking, rather than constantly scribbling down notes about the previous slide, one way that you can do that is you can create a handout. So you can say, okay, there is a handout that covers all of the material in this presentation. You can take that home afterwards and you'll have that, and so you don't necessarily need to take notes. More importantly though, and this is actually the real reason that this slide is in here, it helps you to avoid putting, and this is particularly for people who are teachers, putting all of the content on the slide. So we have kind of a problem where people go, okay, the slide needs to be the entire content of what I'm trying to teach, and it needs to be the backdrop for the talk. The important thing to learn and to understand here, those are two distinct functions. Use two distinct things for them. So the slides are there to sit behind your verbal presentation. They shouldn't be terribly useful without it. If you just hand the slides out, they shouldn't mean terribly much on their own. But if you want that depth of information and you want to be able to share that with people, do a handout so that you can then send them a PDF or you can send them some extra information. And then you're not bogging down your slides with the requirements for basically what is a document. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right. This is pretty crucial, and I'm kind of returning to this theme a few times, but no matter how much you feel like you've trimmed it down, you probably can go a little bit further, and it makes a huge difference. So this idea of less is more, the simpler it can be, the more it will resonate with people, is really crucial, and you should have that in the back of your mind all the time. Don't be worried about missing something. If you feel like something's a bit of an awkward fit, err on the side of cutting it out rather than leaving it in, because you'll find that people are more likely to take that one thing away that you really want them to take away. Now, I've included a couple of quotes on this theme because I enjoy quotes. Leonardo da Vinci said that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. And if you're not super into Leonardo da Vinci, I've got another one for you, which is Bruce Lee. He says simplicity is the key to brilliance. So I think if you've got Leonardo da Vinci and Bruce Lee agreeing on something, I think it's probably worth paying attention to. That's probably true. All right, So you made your slide deck, you've kept your slides kind of really minimalist, you've tried to keep the word count down, you've tried to make it a backdrop to your talk and not the entire talk itself. Now it's time to actually prepare to give a presentation. And for people who haven't done this before, and this is certainly something that I had to learn over time, it wasn't something that I did naturally, there are a few things that you can do just to make it easier to actually give a presentation to an audience, particularly a large audience or an unfamiliar audience or whoever it is that you need to speak to. So that's what I'd like to talk about now. So the first thing that you can do to make your life easier is learn as much as you can about your audience and do what you can to tailor your talk to that audience. So figure out ways that you can make it relatable. So if you're speaking to a young audience, think about pop culture references and things that you can use to kind of anchor back to what they're interested in and examples that they might understand. Be very, very careful about jargon and technical terms and things that your audience might not understand. Do your very best to eliminate those whenever you can, but in particular, think about whether your audience will know those technical terms or not. If they don't, my advice is, rather than use the term and define it, try and avoid using the term if you can, and try explaining things in a different way. And I think you'll find you actually explain it better if you take the time to take a step back and say, okay, I can't use all of this jargon that everyone in my industry uses. How can I explain this in a way that's relatable to someone who's not in that industry? So that's a pretty crucial thing. There's a very minor kind of way of thinking about this as well. And this was something that I learned when I did the TEDx presentation. If you can, before the presentation happens, actually try and talk to some members of the audience. Try and make some friends with people in the audience. Because you'll find that that's actually a lot easier when you stand up in front of the large group. If you can see some friendly faces and some people that you've had a conversation with, you'll find that that just takes the sting out of it a little bit. It seems like a small thing, but it's actually a really major thing, particularly for really big presentations that you're finding to be quite intimidating. Just spending a little bit of time to get to know some people in the audience and knowing that they're out there really helps. Now, you also want to know the venue. This was a particularly easy thing for me this evening because I'm here a lot, but if this was an unfamiliar venue, I would have come here, if not the day before or sometime during the week before, I would have come here on the night really early so that I could get a feel for the lay of the land with the venue. I knew basically what you're trying to do is eliminate uncertainty. You don't want to be nervous about anything other than the talk. And so you want to make sure that you're there, that you know where the AV desk is, you know where you need to take your computer to, you know what systems they have. Are you going to be giving the talk on your computer and are they going to be plugging in? What connections do they have? Do you need to bring the computer on do you need to bring the presentation on a USB drive? Will the venue have a microphone? Are you going to need to shout to be heard in that venue or is it going to be fairly quiet? All of those sorts of things, some of them you won't be able to change, some of them you might be able to, but just knowing what you're walking into before you walk into it makes an enormous difference in terms of your confidence and your ability to do a good job. Now, you also don't want to be giving your talk on a stage and that be the first time that you've given that talk. Find a way to practice. Now, there are lots of different ways to practice. Some people recommend, getting some friends and family and giving a talk to some friends and family. Some people recommend just talking to yourself in front of a mirror. My advice is generally those things are good. Any kind of practice is good, but the best possible thing you can do is, let's say you're going to be giving a talk to 50 people that's an audience over at the university or some industry forum or something like that. If you can get an audience of strangers in a small workshop setting like this, and you can give your talk there as a little bit of this is a talk I'm going to be doing later, but I'm just practicing it, there's no better practice than that. Because that's the practice where you're actually as close as possible to the real thing as you can get without actually doing the thing for real. So the closer you can get with your practice, the better. Now, one thing that I will stress here, and this is something that I know from experience as well, if you try and be word perfect, you're setting yourself up to fail. So this is not about practicing so that you get every single sentence and every single word in the right place and all of that sort of stuff. Now, different schools of thought exist, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But my advice would be never go for word perfect. Make sure that you know what the key points are that you want to get across. Make sure that you know what the key points are for each of your slides, and make sure that you deliver those key points. It doesn't matter what the wording is like. Doesn't matter if you accidentally spend 15 seconds on one slide when you planned for 10 and you spend 10 on another one when you planned for 20. That's okay. It also doesn't matter if you miss a key message or two. Like, you can survive that. You can move on. As long as you've got your one key message and you know you're coming back to that, that's the one people will remember anyway. The rest is just contextualization for that. So practice is about practicing speaking. It's not about practicing your speech. Because what I've found, and I was involved in a pitching competition where I had a great opportunity to go to Queensland and do a pitch to a very impressive room of people, and I think there was a prize pool of like $5,000 or something, so it was a really stressful, really exciting opportunity. And I had practiced word perfect, and I'd been up all night in my hotel room just practicing word perfect and getting it absolutely nailed. And then I got to the day of the event itself, and my taxi dropped me on the wrong side of the campus. So I was 20 minutes walk from where I needed to be. I'd arrived early, but my early was gone. I got to the place and I thought I'd be able to sneak off to a quiet corner and just do a bit of extra practice before I went in. But the place was just buzzing with people and everyone wanted to talk to me. And it was just like a really kind of busy environment, so I couldn't do any more practice. We were the last pitch of the day. And so I walked into this tiny boardroom with all of these scary people in suits, and it was hot and it was horrible, and it was clear that they had been in there all day, and I would have to absolutely blow their socks off for them to pay even a single scrap of attention to me in that moment. And I had practiced word perfect, and it all just went out of my head. It was really, really hard for me to recover from that. Now, on the day, I did okay, and I muddled through. But I know if I had been more flexible about how I practiced it and didn't worry about getting it exactly to the perfect time, maybe trimmed out a little bit of content just so that I had a little bit of breathing room and just practiced my key points, I still probably wouldn't have won the competition, but I would have had a far easier time in that room. So a lot of what I'm talking about in this section of the talk is really what can you do before the talk to make it less stressful when you actually walk out onto the stage and when you're actually live and ready to go. A lot of that comes down to how you practice. Not whether you practice or not, but how you practice. All right, so there's that. You've prepared your talk, you know what you're talking about. You've developed your slide deck and you've been following these rules of keeping it simple, trying to do 1 point per slide, trying to make sure that you've got some striking and memorable imagery. Now it's the actual day of the talk itself. So you need to go and you need to talk some shit. What I'm going to talk about now is like, what do you do on the day and how do you go about that? So one of the very key things, and this is something that people who know me know I'm not terribly good at, you want to arrive early. So you want to be there before the talk starts. This is a little bit like scouting the venue beforehand. If you arrive and you're setting everything up at the last second, you're going to be stressed no matter what happens, and you're going to carry that stress with you to the microphone and you're going to start talking. That doesn't look great, it doesn't feel great, it makes it really hard to do a good job. If you arrive early, you can spend that little bit of time making sure that everything's up and running. So in a perfect world, in my view at least, you should be at the venue before the first person who will be in the audience is at the venue. That usually only means being 20 or 30 minutes early. But what that means is that you can make sure that everything's set up, everything's working, your little clicker's doing its job, all of that's kind of in place. And you've got 15 or 20 minutes to either talk to people in the audience if you would like to, or just relax. Just kind of get your nerves out of your system as best you can. It's a small thing, but it makes a huge difference. If you arrive like bang on time at the last minute, you'll have a stressful time. This is something that I do really religiously these days. I always bring just about everything that I could imagine I might need. So no matter what they tell me the venue has, I'll show up with my full laptop bag. My talk will be on my laptop. I'll have all of the adapters for my MacBook that allow me to connect into different kinds of projectors and all of that sort of stuff. And I'll have my own remote control. So that means if they want me to run everything on my own computer, I can do that. I'll also have the presentation on a USB drive in my pocket. If they want me to use their equipment, I can use their equipment. But it's very fast and it's very seamless either way. It's so easy to just assume because they told you in the email to bring in the presentation on a USB that you don't need to have your own computer there. But I've certainly been caught by that before, where you arrive and they don't have the right adapters for whatever, or, and so on. So if you're going to be doing a lot of this, or if it's quite a high stakes thing, just assume that they're hopeless. Just assume that the venue actually has no idea what they're doing and you need to bring everything. Worst case scenario, it'll all sit on your laptop bag in a corner and you won't touch any of it. This is really important, and it's something that I've been caught by a number of times until I basically changed my policy to do this. These days, it's never an issue. As long as I've got my gear with me, I'm pretty happy. Another thing that's really crucial, when you do walk out onto the stage, try and stay pretty fixed in place if you can. So basically walk out, find a spot that you're kind of comfortable, it's kind of good relative to the screen, you can see the audience, you're happy with where you are. Lock your feet in place, give yourself a little bit of a stance like this, so widen your legs basically, set yourself up, lock yourself in place and talk from there. Now, if you've got a podium and you've got a microphone and all that sort of stuff, this is less important. But if you're standing in the middle of a stage and you're on your own and you are pacing back and forth and you're kind of moving around on your feet and all of that sort of stuff, it will come across as nervousness to most people. And it also makes it a little bit harder to project your voice and to kind of project from a position of strength when you're giving the presentation. Now, over time, you can adjust these sorts of things. Like I said earlier, this is really about if you're getting started and you want to get better at this and you want to practice for real in front of real audiences, this is a great thing to do. It helps a lot. If you're pacing back and forth, you'll just find that you start to lose your track. All sounding pretty good? All right. This is another one that people struggle with. And back when I was teaching, this was a massive issue. You probably have a lot to say, and you probably don't have a whole heap of time to say it. And so you might feel like there's no time to breathe. And you just have to blurt out every single thing that you want to say, and you have to belt through all of your material and keep cramming words into the air until there's no room for anything else. But one of the things that's really important with public speaking and any kind of presentation is that you probably should be talking more slowly than you would in conversation. So you actually want to be, when you feel like you should be talking quickly and you should be talking more quickly than normal, you actually want to slow down, give yourself a little bit more space in between sentences, give yourself a little bit more breathing room. Because firstly, if people are listening and they're writing notes, if you're 1,000 miles a minute, they've got no hope and they're going to get frustrated and they're going to struggle. But also, it's actually just really hard to listen and to understand. There's no room for the words to hit the person's brain and for the brain to comprehend before the next shovel of words hits them. Now, something that I like to recommend that people do is have a think about who your favourite public speakers are. And look up a video or two and listen to them. And listen in particular for their speed and listen for their pauses. And I think you'll find most of the best public speakers, the ones that inspire you, the ones that you think are really excellent, are super slow, way slower than you imagined they were. Two examples that I really like are Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's an astrophysicist who does a lot of presentations. He talks crazy slow, but man, do you listen. Like you hang on every word because he's talking and you want to hear what he says next. Steve Jobs, particularly in TV interviews and that sort of stuff, they would ask a question. He would sit there probably for 30 seconds, composing his answer in his head and then responding to it. You actually can get away with this. It feels like an eternity up here, but for the people in the audience, it's just a presentation and they're grateful for that little bit of breathing. Now, this is something, because we're recording it tonight, I'm not doing this as much as I normally would. But I think the best possible way to do presentations is to be conversational. So actually try and interact with your audience a little bit. Try and open them up so that they're actually engaged in the conversation, not just listening. This helps a lot with you because you're then kind of talking to friends rather than just projecting out into the universe. But it helps for people who are thinking about presentations as, oh, it has to be super formal. I have to use all of my technical jargon. I have to kind of, it has to be professional and it has to hit all of these boxes. The truth is, even in a very professional setting, if you're natural and you're confident and you're conversational, it will come across better than it would have been if you'd been kind of super professional and very straight with the presentation. You still need to know your stuff. You still need to know what you're talking about. You still need to have your story and your structure and all of that sort of stuff figured out. But you don't necessarily have to pretend to be someone you're not to give a good presentation. And in fact, I would argue you shouldn't. You'll actually give a bad one if you try. Now, it's easier to do this if you don't have a lot of words on your slides, but my advice would be never read your slides. You want to glance at them, and you'll probably notice I'm doing that today. I look down at my screen down there, I go, okay, we're talking about not reading our slides. And then I return to the audience and I talk to the audience about that topic. The danger that you get into if you do have a lot of words on your slides is you start reading the slides and the people in the audience are thinking, yeah, I can read. Why didn't you just send me the slides? I could have read the slides. This is all a waste of my time. And they're not wrong. They could read and it's a waste of their time. So what you want to be doing is trying to put yourself in a position where you're talking and interacting with your audience, you're not reading your slides. If you are reading your slides, particularly if they're behind you and you're kind of standing here and you're just reading this off and all of that sort of stuff, you've got your back to the audience, you're not engaging with people. It's just a really bad thing to do, but it's a hard habit to break. So if you feel like you need your slides as a crutch, one of the tricks that I use, particularly for really big, dense presentations, so not like this, but kind of much more content-dense ones, is I'll create a handout for my audience, which will double as my own speaker notes. So I'll have headings that are really prominent and really easy to read. That will sit on the lectern or it will sit somewhere nearby. I can glance down at that and I can see my structured dot points and all of my reminders for things that I want to talk about. I don't have to look at the slides. All of my content is there. And then I've got that handout that I can give to people they can take away with them. So that's a way that if I do need to do something that's really dense and really content rich, that I do the handout and I double it as my speaker notes and then I'm able to get away with not reading the slides. As soon as you're starting to put notes on the slides for yourself, you're starting to move into pretty dicey territory. Other people do use notes on PowerPoint as well, so they'll have like the little notes field kind of down on the screen. My advice would be probably don't do that. And the main reason for that is just the way PowerPoint works. Your notes will be a quarter of the screen. It's not very much room to do what you need to do. I tend to prefer the slides are the slides. If I need notes, I'll put them on paper, and then it doesn't matter what the setup is at the actual presentation that I'm doing. I know that I've got those notes with me and I can put them down and I can refer to them. So that's how you kind of get around that problem if you need to. All right, now this is something that I'm not doing well tonight, but I'm pretty sure I'm moving through this fairly quickly. If you can, have a clock within eyesight and use that to keep to time. So try and set yourself up in a position where, and if you're following all of these things that I've kind of recommended, what you'll find is for any particular slide, you can either dwell on it for a little while or you can move past it quickly. And that gives you the ability to control the speed of your presentation overall. So if you get halfway through and it's a 30-minute presentation and you're on 15 minutes, you're like, awesome, just like I practiced, off I go, I'll finish it off. But if you get halfway through and you're 20 minutes through, you go, okay, I'm now going to move it up a clip and I'm going to talk less about this slide and this slide and this slide because they're not really the core important ones. And then you get to the end. If you do feel like you're running behind time, do content more quickly, skip slides, like basically do what you need to do to get back on time. Because if you're following the story idea and you've got a beginning, a middle and an end, the last thing you want to do is stuff up your ending. So sacrifice a little bit in the last half to make sure that you can spend the time you need to on concluding your talk, tying everything together. Having a clock within eyesight helps a lot with this. And if you've practiced with a clock, you'll get better at it as well. All right. Now we're going to open up to discussion in a second, but there is one last thing that I want to mention. And that is really that this is just the way that I do things. So this is how I've learned to do it over a period of time. This is certainly my honest advice about how I think you should go about learning to do it yourself, and something that I think is a good approach. But the truth is, I've seen incredible presentations that have broken every single one of the rules that I've put in this slide deck. Now, I don't think I've seen one that's broken every single rule all at once. They usually do a mix of these things. But I certainly know some people who they do a slide every 5 seconds or so and are just belting away on this thing, and the slides are just kind of ratcheting past and they talk really quickly, and it's an incredible experience. And you walk out thinking, wow, I've been taken on a journey, this is amazing. So I guess the way I think about this is really this is just like writing or art or anything else. You develop your own style over time. There are some good rules of thumb that can help you to get started on a good footing. But over time, if you find yourself thinking, you know what, I actually think that I should be doing things in a different way because I feel like that's going to work better for me, that's actually totally okay and totally legitimate. This is not a science. This is something that is really what I've talked about today is just these are the rules that have worked for me. I've learned them through experience, and I've learned them through giving lots of presentations, making them better. Probably with the slides, I've been very lucky to work with designers and have designers help me with my slides in the past, which now means that I'm a lot better at doing them myself. So hopefully that gives you a shortcut, but please don't think this is the only way to do things. There's a hell of a lot more to it than that. So that's it. But there's heaps in there. So I'm more than happy to take some questions and talk about the different steps and the different bits if you would like to. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, thanks for saying about rules may be broken. Have you found that different sort of categories or genres, whatever you're talking about, have you found that certain themes sort of hit that fast pace or not? Or does it really matter about what you're actually talking about to the pace of it? Or when you sound like some of the best people you've seen that broke those rules, do you think it's the topic that needs to be sped up like that, or it's the presenter more or less?
Well, I think probably the biggest difference that I've seen with different people doing it, I am not a very high energy presenter, so I don't kind of ramp up the room and get everyone really excited and then kind of, move really fast and talk really fast. I've seen a lot of people who do present like that. I think it's more a style thing than a content thing. Like typically they're more likely to be talking to a younger audience. They're more likely to be talking about perhaps their own, like they're not so much talking about content. They're not trying to teach a thing or trying to pitch a particular idea or anything like that. They're probably more trying to create an emotion and create an experience.
More of a story thing.
Yeah, like so the story isn't in service of the content, the story is just a story. Right. So that's probably one example. I think the key thing with that final point for me though is if you start with these principles, I think you'll do pretty well. And I think people will listen when you talk and they'll take a lot away from your presentation, which ultimately is what you want to be focusing on. But don't be afraid of straying from here and trying other things out and seeing if they work. But if you try high energy really fast, doing lots of things, and it doesn't work, go back to basics. I think that's really the trick of it. What I've tried to do today is give a bit of a foundation that you can build from. But yeah, I guess the cautionary tale at the end is don't assume this is the only way to do it. It's just a way that works, I think.
James, have you found much difference between female presenters and male presenters? Or have you ever seen a really outstanding female presenter?
I haven't seen much difference, no. I think like what good looks like isn't really gender specific. I think the best female presenters that I've seen tend to do the same sorts of things. Content might be slightly different, but really the way it's structured. Like a lot of this stuff is just, really it's just advice to think about it perhaps a little bit more deeply than most people do. And the best presenters all do that.
I just brought it up because I read some research recently that said as soon as women start talking, men switch off. So I was just wondering whether when women are giving presentations, whether that happens as much as well. It's a bit disconcerting, really.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think if a woman's on a stage or on a panel, my experience is they're listened to in the same way that anyone else is. But I'm not sure what the context of that research was. But yeah, there's certainly a bad presenter.
Female teachers.
Yeah.
Boys switch off when female teachers talk.
Yeah, I have heard that with teachers and particularly boys switching off. Not sure how to fix that. I think it's much more about fixing the boys than it is about fixing the teachers. Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah.
You've got a few, Henry?
Yeah. Because I do presentations a lot myself, and it's something that I'm really interested in. Something that you did that you didn't talk about, that maybe some of the other people here might not have noticed, was eye contact. It's easy in this sort of space to get proper eye contact with everybody, but when you're on a much bigger stage, it's still important to get your message across to everybody to make it look like you're actually looking at individuals through the whole audience. So I don't know how many people observed James doing it, but he actually did, as he was talking, he did look around the whole room. He got eye contact with everybody in the audience.
Yeah, I haven't done a lot of massive presentations, but I've done a few. And what I have done in the bigger ones is I look around for the people who are the active listeners. So let's say you've got 100 people in front of you. There will be some people there who will nod and who will kind of listen and who will kind of be responding in some way. And I try and pick a few of those around the room, and I just try and kind of swoop around and visit them regularly, because that way it does create the sense that you are kind of scanning the room. You don't forget to look at the people who sit over there, which is a really easy thing to do if you're in kind of a racked seating arrangement. One of the things that was most disconcerting about the TED talk, actually, was it was under stage lights, and I'd never done that before. And so I walked out, and there are these blinding spotlights coming down, and you can't see your audience. And that was actually probably the most stressful thing about it, is I felt completely destabilised, because they could have been out there thinking, this guy's a dickhead, he doesn't know what he's talking about, and I would have had no way of knowing. I would have had no kind of anchor to read that off. And as you practice and as you get better at this stuff, you will find that you can adjust your presentation as you deliver it based on the feedback that you're getting from the audience. And again, having fairly sparse Slides makes it easier to do that than if you've tried to codify absolutely everything up there. So if you try and deviate from the script, but the script's up there, people know you're deviating from the script and they start wondering why.
Any tips for if you feel like you are losing engagement with an audience, how to rectify that?
Yeah. So you probably noticed during this presentation, I would kind of periodically stop and say, hey, like, all good so far. Everyone with me, everyone kind of understands. So little things like that help just to jar people back into thinking. So that can be a useful thing. That's a very light touch thing. I have, particularly presenting to teenagers, holy hell, teenagers are hard to engage in any meaningful way. And so I have been known to basically just go completely off script. Like I basically just stop for a second and say, okay, we're going to jump over here and talk about something completely different, and then we're going to come back. The key thing is recognising when attention is flagging and not just doing what you were going to do anyway. Like you have to kind of go, okay, attention's flagging, I can ride this into the abyss for the next 15 minutes, or I can stop now and I can waste 2.5 minutes just kind of shaking it up for a second, and then I can bring people back. And so I will often do that with a question to the audience or with some sort of way, like particularly with that conversational style, you can actually stop and you can question the audience and try and get a bit of engagement back, and that helps to liven the room up again. But it is tricky. Some audiences are just openly hostile to the idea of being engaged, and it's quite hard. But that's a little bit of knowing your audience as well. Yeah. Is that a useful answer?
Yeah, no, that was good.
Yeah.
Because I get to get sales pitches and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Too techy, and then I might have lost them. How do I
Yeah.
get back?
And the trick there is, and this is a key with everything here. When I think about this stuff, I think this is a lifetime project. I feel like I'm pretty good at it now, but I will always have room to get better, and I will never be the best person in the world at this stuff. The way you get better is you notice that moment. You go, just wait a second, and this is true for pitching as well, which is I'm not really talking about today, but the best way I think of getting good at pitching is you keep telling people your idea, and you notice when their eyes glaze over. You notice when they just kind of go, I'm not sure about that. What I do is when I'm fine-tuning pitching an idea or pitching a concept or pitching a place like Enterprize or the company BitLink or whatever, I tell people and I make a mental note of, that story or that hook, that really worked. I'm going to keep that in. And then I try stuff and it doesn't work, and I go, okay, that's actually got to go. And over time, you can really start to fine-tune things, which is why when I talk about practicing, I say practice for real, because if you are practicing for real and you can figure out ways to do that, you will practice and you will go back and you will change your slide deck. You'll go, you know what? I got to that slide about planting your feet and people were just like, this is common sense, I don't need to know this, like this was a complete waste of time, I totally lost them there, maybe I'll just ditch that slide, maybe I won't need it. Or in fact, what happened with this presentation is I did this presentation once and I didn't have that slide in there, and then I thought, just wait a second, that's actually one of the best pieces of advice someone ever gave me for how to manage nerves and actually project your voice and be kind of strong on a stage. Why isn't that in there? And so the next time I did the presentation, I slipped that slide in. So yeah, I think that's probably one of the really key things is don't make your slide deck better by sitting in an armchair and revving your head and thinking about how it could be better. Wherever possible, do that presentation. Or even if you're doing it without slides and without notes, you're just talking to someone, make a mental note of what works and what doesn't. Doesn't help when your very first sales pitch is like the $1 million deal that you really need. Like that's why you try and engineer scenarios that aren't that first, and then you work your way up to it.
I'm not sure if it's a question or a statement, but would you agree that it's important that you authentically know and understand the topic that you're talking about? Because I've seen presentations where people have done all of these things, but they're just, like it's too slick and there's no soul to it, and they'll ask you that question and they'll want the audience to answer, and it's almost like you just don't want to answer because you just think, no, I'm not going to buy into this because it's just inauthentic,
So I think, yeah, there's some common sense stuff, which is you should know what you're talking about, and if you don't know what you're talking about, you should spend the time to learn what you're talking about. You can probably tell my style is very much, I try and be conversational. I try and be honest about what I know and what I don't. I am genuinely trying to help people, but I don't think I'm God's gifts to presentations or to anything that I talk about. Like it's all kind of stuff that I could be better at, and teaching other people how to do it is part of the way that I cement how I've learned how to do it. I think there are cases where people follow all of these rules. They do a very, very slick presentation, but it feels like sales. It doesn't feel like they're actually sharing what they know. For me, it comes back to that conversational approach. It comes back to respect for the audience. Like you are trying, even in a room with 150 people, those people should leave feeling like they know you a little bit. And hopefully you should feel like you've kind of met some of them as well. Like it should be a more human experience. But I don't know, I mean, maybe that's just me being kind of, maybe that's just how I'd like it to be. There are still cases where a slip presentation is exactly what's required. And I'm not the person for that. I'm not the person to kind of, stand up at the big conference and launch the shiny new product. That's kind of not me. Interesting thought though.
I had a great example. One of the last slides was saying about rules are meant to be broken. One of the rules that I'd read about doing presentations, don't do comedy unless you're a comedian. And I was at this presentation one day and I watched this guy and it was just the most amazing thing. He had Dilbert cartoons scattered throughout his presentation. Now, it was on IT, so hence Dilbert was relevant. And the way he did it was just superb. He wasn't a comedian. He'd go through the slides, he was talking about the points, and then he would get to this Dilbert slide, he would take a step back, he would just let the audience read it, the audience would laugh, and then he'd go on to talk about what the cartoon was about was relevant to what the next point he was trying to get on, and then he'd move on. It was just the most brilliant thing. But every book you'd read on doing presentations would tell you never to do that because it's so hard to get it right.
It's one of the things that I mentioned in my idea of practice. You actually do practice for real, and you try and test things out with strangers and with people in lower risk, lower stress scenarios. With jokes, that's a massive thing. Yeah. So I have a joke that I tell about kind of Enterprize. And so Enterprise, we got our name from a ship. The ship sailed across to Melbourne and it was part of the settlement of Melbourne. And it was a ship called Enterprise with a Z. And so in my pitch to people who were kind of coming through the door, when they said, hey, tell me about Enterprise, what's it all about? I started including this story about this ship called Enterprise that was bought in Hobart, sold in Launceston, sailed out from Georgetown and settled Melbourne. And I started telling people that Melbourne was Tassie's first best startup, and we were hoping to surpass it sometime soon. Or another one that I like to do is we feel like we can take credit for just about every startup in Melbourne, given that we created the Melbourne Accelerator. It's that sort of stuff. And I tried that out with people coming through the door, and it worked really well. It was funny. People liked it. And it was only after I'd done that a few times and I had some confidence with it that I was happy to throw that joke out with a room of 50 people at an important event. But then it got a massive laugh and it was a really, really good hit. So again, it's about if you're worried that the joke might bomb or you're worried that the joke is a little bit too edgy for your audience, get it out of there because you're just going to stress and it's not going to help you. Even if it succeeds, it won't be worth the agony that you're going through waiting for the joke to come and waiting for it to land with the audience. So, you can be a little bit too clever sometimes, I think. But this idea of prototyping, test it out with people. Strangers, you'd be surprised how much of my presentations, the first time I covered that topic was in conversation with someone. And a lot of my presentations are those kind of cobbled together. It helps a lot because you're thinking not in terms of content written in a document, content on a page. We don't write like we talk, it doesn't help. If you test in conversation, if the joke works, it'll work with an audience. But if you think it might work and you haven't tested it, I'd keep it out.
James, have you ever found that when you're doing talk and then you've added something in on the fly that has been really useful and then you've used later on?
Yeah, the planting your feet one was a really great example, but I do it a lot. So I almost always rejig my talks based on questions I get asked. Like if someone asks me a question and I think, man, I should have included that. Like that question is just as important as anything else in there. That happens a lot. So I'm always fine-tuning things. I find that's a real luxury if you are going to be giving the same talk multiple times. To be able to make that talk better is a real luxury. Unfortunately, most of the time we only do talks once. Yeah, that's just a shame, basically.
I'm not sure about the planting your feet.
Yeah?
Yeah. I dance around on the stage. I can't keep still.
What kind of presentations are you up to?
Little presentations. But I find that, and I understand where you're coming from, and the point's valid, but to the same extent it would, if you planted your feet and you didn't move at all, that in itself could give the impression that you're really nervous about the presentation. If you stood like a statue. So,
yeah, it's not so much like a statue, like you are moving around. But
and again, watching you were animated. I looked at the slide when you come to that, and I looked back at you and went, no, you're not standing that still.
Mm.
So yeah, it's important that you're not rigid like a statue, but you're actually trying to be natural.
I think the key thing for that for me is if you're nervous and you're stressed, it makes a huge difference. In my experience, it makes a bigger difference than anything else you can do. Just pick a spot, own it, it's yours. It's probably one of the first things that you evolve from as you get better. It's probably one of the first things that you start doing a little bit more. But it's particularly if you are like this, there's nothing between you and the audience, you're just kind of standing there. If you're dancing around, it's
When I say dancing, I don't literally mean, but I'm quite like this space. I would walk across the whole space in a very casual manner, and as I walked over that way, I'd make eye contact here. As I walked back over this way, I'd make eye contact on that side.
Yeah. So my advice would be probably start by staying still and evolve into that over time, and also constantly have that thing running in the back of your head as you do those lower risk presentations, as you try things out with other people. Is this working? Is this not working? Is this helping? Is it not helping? Because over time you'll evolve your own style. And certainly I'm a chronic pacer. I've deliberately not done it tonight because tonight I've tried as much to model the stuff that I talk about with my actual presentation. I break a lot of these rules myself when I'm doing presentations these days, but in terms of places to start, I think this is really useful. And I think that's actually, coming back to your point, Jen, that's probably one of the things that really annoys me when people stand up and they give a presentation and they say, this is what I do, you should do what I do. And they forget that back when they started, they didn't do any of those things, and they've gone through a whole journey to get to where they are. And it's not enough to just say, be like me, have 10 years experience. You actually have to say where you start and how to kind of get there. Because none of this stuff is just knowing, it's actually doing as well and practicing.
Do you have any tips for people if they do become really nervous and they have an adrenaline rush and their heart's racing and they start to get breathless? Like, how would you have? Well, I mean, it's probably been a long time since you've experienced that, but how would you?
So there are a few things that I would suggest. So the first one is really do everything you can to minimise stress before the talk. And I've tried to talk about that because that's the stuff that's kind of in your control. So do all of that. If you're prone to nervousness, do all of that and make sure that you kind of do everything that you can. In terms of actually managing it at the time, that idea of slowing down, you actually, if you're nervous, if you're breathless, if you're only breathing from like the top eighth of your lungs and you're just kind of whistling, stop. Just try very much, focus on your feet, kind of try and ground back, try and take a proper breath. It will take about 20 seconds and nobody will notice. They'll know you're nervous, but they will not be surprised that you're nervous. They will notice that you've paused for a second. They will not be surprised that you have paused for a second. It allows you to reset, and then you can kind of speak from there. Now that won't work 100% of the time, but that's the only thing you can do, and that's the thing to do in that situation. Now, something that has been suggested to me and something that a lot of people do that's really useful, if you know that you're going to be doing this a lot, I'm very lucky I can project my voice like crazy for some reason. I think it's because I shout at Joe all the time, and I just worked up an ability to kind of fill a room. What? Sorry, mate, I was just talking about how I shout at you all the time. Yeah, see, this is the problem I have. One thing that I have done, which I thought was a bit wanky at the time, but a lot of people really, really appreciated it, is I did a course that was basically like theatre training, like how to project your voice, how to manage nerves, how to do all of that sort of stuff. So it was like learning how to give presentations, but it wasn't, here's how you structure your content, here's how you do your slides. It was just nerves and voice. That was it. That was the whole business. I think it was like a 1 or 2 day thing at UTAS, and it was useful for me. I learned some stuff, but I probably already learned some stuff through experience that I didn't necessarily need to learn again. But for a lot of the people in that course, that was night and day. Like, they went from being terrified by a stage to actually being able to do it. And a lot of what they'll do there is teach you breathing exercises, things you can do off the side of the stage before you go on, just to kind of manage your heart rate and all of that sort of stuff. So if you struggle with that, focus on it. Make some time. And actually the best people to teach you are theatre people. Don't talk to business coaches and stuff. Talk to theatre people. They'll teach you it better than anyone else.
I'd add, take a prop on stage with you, which is either a cup or a bottle of water. And if you're really that nervous, just go over and take a drink. No one will think anything of you having to sit. And particularly if you're really nervous, a lot of adrenaline's running, your throat's going to be really dry anyway. So stop for a moment. That'll give you, take a swig, it'll give you the moment to take that deep breath, then come back to where you planted and then start again. That gives you the opportunity to reset, and no one will even notice that you're actually doing it.
This is actually something that's too esoteric to go into the slides, but something that is really useful to know as well. Don't drink really milky drinks before you go and do a talk, like you'll just be the whole time. And also, if you're having water, don't make it ice cold water. Like, try and get some room temperature water from somewhere. It'll make a big difference, particularly if you struggle with voice projection and that sort of stuff anyway. Those are a couple of ways that you can make it harder for yourself that you can avoid pretty easily. I actually learned that because I was doing a lot of radio interviews, and that was some advice that was given to me by a radio presenter. So that's a good thing to be aware of. Yeah, I definitely agree with Henry. Probably not so much props. I think, again, that's something you work into. But to have water, the water. Nobody is at all concerned if you have a sip of water. It gives you a break. It gives you a moment to go, okay, I need to reset and have a sip of water.
You're taking this, I mean, when I'm set a prop on a drink of water or a cup, and that gives you the opportunity to take the drink, take the long deep breath to reset yourself so that you don't get too flustered.
Cool.